Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for How to Bridge the Gap Between Ambition and AI Reality, hosted by us here at Precisely and CDO Magazine. As you all know, AI is changing the way that all of our organizations work, but many leaders are realizing that their AI ambitions are running well ahead of the data that's supposed to support them. So, to get a clearer picture of what's really going on, we at Precisely teamed with Drexel University's LeBeau College of Business, and we surveyed more than 550 data and analytics professionals, and the results of that research became our 2025 Data Integrity Trends and Insights report. And one of the things that jumped out immediately to us was the fact that 88% of companies said that their data just isn't ready for AI. And that's a big signal that something is quite off. And it's why we're here today. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to talk about what it actually takes to be AI ready as an organization, not really in theory, but in the real day-to-day work of running a business. And we're going to dig into how teams are building the data integrity needed for trustworthy AI outcomes, how AI is starting to speed up core data management tasks, and how organizations are thinking about AI governance and what a practical roadmap for scaling AI looks like in enterprises. So my goal is that we're able to walk out of this conversation today with a little bit more clarity, with some ideas on how we can put these ideas to work right away, and honestly, with a more grounded view of what's really possible within the enterprise. But before we really jump into the conversation, I want to make sure that we introduce all of our panelists for today's discussion. We have Simi George, Head of Data Science and Strategy at the Doctors Company, Shanti Padota, SVP and CDAO at Bank of Oklahoma, Saba Dasani, CDAO at Comerica Bank, and Charu Mehta, Global Product Head, AI and Data Strategy and Management at MasterCard. So thank you all for joining me today. And I do want to have a reminder before we jump into the panel discussion that if you do have any questions during the session, you can use the Q&A within the chat to ask any questions, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end of today's discussion. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into the conversation today, and we'll sort of use that stat that 88% of organizations saying that their data isn't AI ready to really kind of kick things off. So my question to you all is pretty simple. So is like, why is that the case, and why are people getting this wrong? And I guess for to get us started, I'm going to start with Saba today.
All right. Antonio, thank you for having me here. It's great to be a part of this discussion with this panel. Very good question. I would say, though, that it's interesting how AI is starting up the conversation on data quality, right? Because for those of us who've been in the data space for a long time, almost all our entire career of mine, quality data has always been a challenge. It's just that with AI, it's coming up more and more. The one thing, though, I'll touch on when I think about AI readiness and what I see as I talk to a lot of my peers and the challenges outside of just the general AI, the data quality aspect is, through the years, especially when big data was becoming a big thing, a lot of companies spend a lot of money collecting data, right? But there was really no thought process put in place as to, how to ensure that the data you are collecting has the right accuracy, the right quality, and even the cataloging piece. So we spend a lot of time just collecting data for the sake of collecting data. And that's a reality for a lot of companies. And now we are at a point where for AI, you need to understand where that data is. Do you even have a catalog? An understanding of where all your data sits, because the reality is, even today, with most companies, data is very siloed. We don't have the right business definitions. So, starting with that foundation of understanding what all data you've collected over the years, and not just on a structured data side, I would say even unstructured data, because that's one of the
Hmm.
cool things about AI, right? It doesn't, you can use AI on structured, unstructured, all types of data. And having that catalog information across is like one of the key foundations of getting AI data ready for AI. I'll hand it off to Simi to see what she has to add to it.
Fully agree with everything that you've said. I've been in many organizations that grew by acquisitions. So you
Mhm.
have data silos across the company. And there's some compliance issues with merging data and making it ready for AI. At the end of the day, AI needs clean, consistent, and well-governed data, not just lots of data when you're trying to solve that critical business problem. And identifying that critical business problem, what problem are you going to solve with your technology stack is going to be number one, too, on top of needing and identifying the appropriate data that you need for that problem. So the siloed systems, especially when it's poorly integrated, doesn't have the metadata traceability and has quality issues. Often, one of the reasons why organizations have a hard time gaining value on the newest and latest technologies that are coming out in the data science space. On top of that, I come from dealing with protected health information and
Mhm.
legal and financial data. All of those require different securities and different compliances associated with its use with AI tools and technologies. We're thinking about how are we de-identifying some of the data that we need to use with some of the models that we're trying to build, and what is the certification path for
Mm.
de-identification. So there is a lot of mathematical problems associated with the statistics of data too that we need to think about. So all of this pose a challenge for creating that high value product that scales from pilot to enterprise use.
Chara, what do you think?
I think I agree with everything we've been talking about so far. I think to me, this is a mindset shift that all the industries are going through right now. I think historically, data has still, believe it or not, been a little bit more of a afterthought as opposed to an integral part of any transformation and initiative that is happening. And organizations that do really, really well and have done well historically are the ones that did not separate data out of any other business discussion that they were having. That said, this is not necessarily a problem. I think it's a great opportunity for organizations to actually leapfrog, even the ones that
Mm.
were very, very behind in their data management. I think it's a great opportunity for them to leapfrog. Now, everybody wants to do AI. I think there's statistics around 65 or 70% of CEOs are involved in AI discussions. If they
Right.
want to do that right, they have to have the data right. It's garbage in, garbage out, basically. So they can leapfrog, and the right data management will not only help them get their AI use cases in place, but also help uplift the rest of the business because, quite frankly, there shouldn't be anything happening without data in the picture. I think one approach that has proven to be very successful, I can tell you in North America and Europe, and is catching up in other regions as well, is data as a product approach, which works not only to set up your data the right way for AI, but also for the rest of the business.
And Shanti, we'll close out this first question with you.
No, first, thank you for having me and excited to be
Of
here.
course.
I'm really going to reiterate what my colleagues here on the panel have said. One is obviously we all have legacy systems. Unless you were born on the cloud, we have to deal with a lot of these legacy systems, a lot of data silos, and the architecture has kind of evolved more organically in many instances. And since OpenAI kind of talked about ChatGPT in late November of 2022, there's been a rapid growth here. And there's definitely a skill set gap as well that we need to address in addition to data and having the
Uh,
underlying technology. And, like Saba and others said, governance has been something that's been an afterthought. So how do you think about data governance and good data foundations? Having a good data catalog, not only structured, but unstructured data, semi-structured data, lineage, understanding how data flows through the ecosystem, and quality controls as the data is coming through the door. Anytime you implement quality controls towards the tail end of the process, it just gets exponentially expensive and challenging to do that. So how do you shift left? We live in a world where there's constant change. Business processes are changing, business needs are changing, technology is changing. So having robust change management process is another key component we need to invest in and make it part of a core foundation. And like some of my colleagues shared here, it's very much use case driven. You can have all the technology and all the data in the world, but if you're not clear on what the outcome it is that you're trying to drive, you're probably going to be limited in the success that you're going to achieve with AI.
Absolutely. I think some of the things that I heard was being able to find and understand the data that's available to you, putting in some foundational data management practices and not forgetting about the fact that there's also the people that are involved in this process and that AI readiness isn't just necessarily about the data. While that's a massive part of it, there's the organizational readiness that's also a major factor in making sure that your organization can actually take on AI initiatives that are going to deliver real value and not just be sort of a pet project of someone that wants to do something interesting. So I guess we'll take that forward and focus a little bit on that AI readiness from a data perspective. So, and I'm going to come back to you, Shanti, to start, but what does AI ready data actually look like? And how do you know that you're actually there? How do you know that you've gotten to a place that the data is in a good enough place to be able to use it at an enterprise AI scale?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think there's lots of components we have to look at, like lots of metrics around here. Obviously, we all agree data readiness is foundational for successful AI implementation. A couple of key things to consider. One is quality and completeness. We touched on that. And what does that actually mean? So you really want to have good representation of some key critical data sets, including outliers. AI needs this diversity to learn. And that doesn't mean you go after perfect data and boil the ocean. It's really being very targeted in what those critical data sets are. And good enough is a good place to start with. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. So just kind of start with good enough and continue to evolve. And just like humans, AI needs context. Rich metadata is key to AI. And metadata, again, it's a broad spectrum. You have business metadata, operational metadata, technical metadata, you have passive metadata, and you have more active metadata. So again, I'm a big fan of automation. Given how much metadata, manually implementing this is not a scalable or a sustainable solution. So look at automation in terms of how you collect, constantly enrich your catalog with the right semantic tags for both structured as well as unstructured data. Governance and security, policies are really important, and responsible use of it. Privacy and access control should be something you think about early on. PII deduction, anonymization, and classification-based controls just should be, core component when you think about AI. And implement controls to monitor for bias, compliance needs, ethical use of it. In Europe, typically you see, like, even with data, a lot more controls, like GDPR kind of started up. US generally tends to follow. While we haven't seen a lot of those compliance requirements yet for AI, we're still in the early days, right? But one should anticipate these would be coming soon and be preparing for it. So we're not reactive, but thinking about it as we are still in the early days of our AI journey here, having more formal data governance frameworks, ability to track your sources of data, which is going to be really important to understand what agents and what models use what data and the lineage. So that also helps with change management that I talked about earlier. So when change happens, how do I understand the impact of that change and be more proactive about it? An alignment of AI use cases, right? That there's no one size fits all, you can't just dump a bunch of data and expect it to be successful. It's really being very targeted in what are the specific requirements, what's the data volume and diversity of data that you need, what labeling of data needs that are relevant for that particular use case. And of course, another key area is feature engineering readiness, right? Document all the transformations that happen and create a catalog of feature data sets that you can reuse. Last but not the least is really operationalization of all of these things. Version controlling, so you can reproducibility, monitoring with quality checks at ingestion, And lifecycle management, AI is not a one-time thing. You constantly, as your data evolves, you need to continue to retrain your model. So looking at all of those aspects, I think, is where you truly are ready to do AI at scale.
Awesome. Okay, we're doing a little bit of the reverse round robin from the first time, so we'll go to you, Charu.
Well, I think to me, it's very simple in terms of readiness of data. It's your inputs and outputs. If it's taking you, I don't know, months to get your data ready to put it into the model, depending on what type of architecture you're using, that's a problem right off the bat. As you set up your monitoring for the outputs that are coming out of the model for use into the use cases and the outcomes that are coming out and what you're publishing, if there are errors in that, that's a problem. Your input data is the first place to look at. So I think just these basic indicators as you start out in your journey, whether it is the early use cases or you're trying to scale those up, they are very quick indicators that your data is not ready, and you should put in time and effort to ensure that is in place before you're trying to do anything else with it. And again, I'm going to reiterate, it's not just getting your data management right for Gen AI and AI use cases. Of course, there's a lot of unstructured data that is being leveraged for the models. But I think getting your data in the right place is going to actually accelerate the rest of your business that is not using Gen AI as well. So that's just something basic organizations just need to get proactive about.
Simi, how about what do you think? You're on mute.
I agree with everything Shanti and Charu have said here. Again, minimizing the time it takes for you to get the latest data. As a business, you're generating data every second of every day in a way, right? Especially if you're working with customers. And so making sure that that data flows into your one source of truth, which is clean and it's consistently flowing in so that the models that you do have deployed to your organization is using the latest information in order to generate that business intelligence and business insights, right? So, like the previous panelists here, if you spend months right now, the data cleaning for us in many organizations take more than 80%. That process is very time consuming and also cost consuming. So making sure that there is pathways for generated data that can reach your models in a much easier way with the right pipelines, with the right governance, with the right security and compliance, that's incredibly important in every organization.
And Saba?
A lot of good points already that, I think each one of them touches the critical aspect of what it means to get have AI ready data. For me, in very simple terms, you'll see your foundation is strong in terms of AI data when your key partners across, right? So for me as a chief data officer, I have to work alongside my other risk partners, whether it be the second line risk or our CISOs or our technology partners, right? When everybody's aligned and things move more smoothly, your data is AI ready because you've kind of solved some of the challenges that the other panelists have been mentioning, right? You'll know you're not ready when you can't even take a pilot to completion because either you're stalling because you didn't have the right data security in place, you didn't have the right data quality in place. So those are signs, right? Are you able to execute? And is your governance, if your governance is standalone, as an afterthought, which it still is, unfortunately, in a lot of instances, then it makes it difficult. But if it becomes part of your day to day and it's integrated in each of those streams, whether it be data protection or second line view of data risk, if it's combined and leveraged across it, your data would be AI ready for execution.
Yeah, I heard things around just making sure that you have all the data you need in place, all those kind of critical data elements that are going to help you bring that project forward, ensuring the overall quality is tip-top shape, and then also making sure that there's that level of context, whether it be from, a metadata perspective or a completeness perspective, making sure that you're bringing in the proper attributes and variables so that your results are contextually relevant. I think to be able to achieve that, a lot of organizations are actually turning to AI itself to help it, get the data ready for AI. Um, so where do you see some of the biggest potential for AI to automate or accelerate data prep? And what's one real example where it made a measurable difference if you all have used AI to help improve your overall data integrity? And I'm going to go back to Simi to start us off on this question.
Yeah, this is one of the key things that's changing in terms of the data management space in my experience, right? Um, so typically, if you think about 300,000 person organization that's globally spread, you have data coming in from all over the world, and you're trying to align and merge and clean up things and make sure everything is where it's supposed to be in terms of landing it in buckets. Um, so that laundry part is extremely time consuming and tedious. And this is where Gen AI has helped immensely in the last few months. In many ways, that's actually quite measurable and quantifiable, right? So automating data cleaning and normalization. Your ETL or your ELT, right? That is one of the critical areas where you can use AI in order to automate some of the processes, like figuring out the anomalies. Essentially, we used to have engineers, data engineers who were doing, and business analysts who are doing EDA. EDA can now be automated using Gen AI, and that's a huge value add and a cost savings for organizations. So basically, missing values, null changes, standardize the formats. It's much faster with AI doing it in large data sets than somebody writing a Python notebook or Python code in order to do it and making sure that everything is correct. Now you can have the AI write the code, implement it, and then you can have a human verify that it's supposed to be where it is, so you can give it metrics. So that's a huge area of time savings and cost savings that we've noticed with Gen AI applications. Second part is SQL tables, schema mapping and integration, whether you're using Snowflake or Star Schema, whatever it may be. In terms of business and intelligence and the pipelines associated with that, AI is hugely helpful in that in terms of mapping things and integrations between tables and things like that. So we've seen improvements in that area. And then the third area that I've seen in terms of data management is metadata and classification. So from a governance standpoint, knowing what you have, AI can tag, classify, and enrich any data, whether it's unstructured or structured. And that's incredibly helpful, whereas it used to be manual processes in the past, manual and expensive. Yeah.
Yeah. I would agree with a lot of what you said, Simi, especially on the metadata and classification. That is one area where I've seen, a lot of tools out there can do the auto classification now, versus where, in the past we've spent tons of time, human hours, trying to really understand what all data is there. Where is your PII so it can appropriately be protected? DLP is another area where AI obviously is helping, and especially in the unstructured area outside of just the data protection pieces. What I would say is we've seen really good use cases of, OCR used to be a technology that's been there for many, many years, right? However, with AI, in terms of extracting of the data in a way that really gets you the value, we've really seen some good results coming from, using AI for purposes like that. And then, goes without saying, on data quality is another, low-hanging fruit in terms of what you can do with AI. Anomaly detection, where it used to take, I'm sure all of us remember the days when you own the data and somebody finds an issue in a report and it's
Yeah.
always reactive, right? Biggest pet peeve of mine is when somebody else finds an issue in the data before my team does. So those are some of the things that I think AI can really help us see things that we weren't even able to do before from a manual analysis perspective.
Yeah.
Shanti?
Yeah, no, I'll expand what Simi and Saba shared. It feels like sometimes a chicken and egg problem, right? Like you need good data for AI, but how can AI help get good
Right.
data? I think you're seeing more of this with the data agents really helping drive the quality controls, the metadata tagging, everything that we talked about. I'll talk about two use cases. One is more from a tool perspective, and the other how you apply tools to drive those efficiencies. Data observability is a classic example where the tools have gotten really good in terms of learning over time the patterns in terms of the volume latency of data. And so they are able to more proactively monitor and signal if there's a sudden drop in volume. And they also account for seasonality over time if this, depending on which industry you are, and if you see heavy volume, for which is seasonal, then they're good at kind of learning those patterns and signaling when you see, now, of course, depends on what thresholds you set, where you really can leverage AI to flag some of these anomalies, unlike manually implementing a lot of these checks like we had to do in the past. Another one we talked about earlier is also about legacy systems. I'm sure some of you have these legacy platforms that have been built for 30, 40 years, a lot of tribal knowledge, very little documentation. And that's where AI can help to kind of reverse engineer, if you will. It's not going to be perfect, but even if you get 30, 40% lift, that's a great place to start where you understand, what's been built over time and how you can reduce the risk in terms of the unknowns that's just grown organically over the years in these data stores.
I think I'll add to that. I think one of the most basic questions we're trying to answer, whether we're trying to build a Gen AI use case or do any kind of analytics or solve any problem, is does the data exist or not? Data discoverability, I would say, is going to be much easier, and all the productivity lost in just trying to figure out whether the data even exists or not, or does it exist in a consumable form. I think that can be hugely expedited. What I talked about earlier about taking months to actually get the data prepped. The starting point is, does the data even exist or not? So I think with the increase in the volume of data or organizations suffering from just many acquisitions and having so many different systems to go through, I think that's an area where AI can really, really help as well.
Fantastic. We've discussed a bit about AI governance thus far in a few different contexts. So, how do we operationalize that, and what are some of the warning signs that tell us that the governance program or framework that we have in place aren't necessarily keeping up with the overall demand? I'm going to actually go back to you, Charu, on this.
Yeah, I think this applies to a number of transformations, that we think about, and it applies to Gen AI as well. And I would say well governed by design. What that means is that we don't treat governance as a separate item we tackle while we're building the use cases or while we're building our infrastructure for Gen AI. I think governance has to be part of that design, and that's true for any transformation. What that means is accountability, transparency in terms of who's responsible for what part of governance, who's monitoring the results, who's monitoring the inputs, how are the results being published, what is being done about it. I think those are very important questions that need to be weaved into the design as we think about the use cases and design those use cases.
And Shanti?
Yeah, I'll add to that. For me, policies need to be actionable, right? So you need to figure out how to translate policies to actual controls that are actionable and implementable, and build your governance into the development pipelines and approvals. That's how you build sustainable things, because if it's again an afterthought, it's always a catch-up game there. So make it part of your standard process. Establish cross-functional AI governance councils, and define an escalation path for really your critical high-risk use cases. And I'm also a big fan of continuous oversight, right? Have feedback loops. You're not going to get it right the first time. So how do you continue to evolve with the right feedback loops and update your policy as you learn? You're not going to get your policy and your controls right in the first go. So it's continuously evolving with those things. And some of the warning signs that I think you should keep an eye on is policies with no teeth when it's not enforceable. That's a sign that the
Yeah.
governance is not working. When there's no clear ownership or accountability, where you have too many people owning it and nobody owns it. So establish those peer accountability structures. And it's not working when you're reactive. If governance only matters
Right.
after something goes wrong, that's obviously a signal that you need to be more proactive and push for operational evidence of approvals. How are we monitoring for biases? And so have clear KPIs, metrics around it that will provide transparency and share with your lines of business and continue to drive action there.
Saba, what do you think?
A lot of what Shanti just said, especially on the policy piece, because that's been, I've seen it in a lot of places that there are policies that are not real world, is what I call them, right? Like on the ground, you'd never be able to implement what's on paper. So having realistic policies to start with, because that basically starts your foundation. And then, you'll know it's not working. The best gauge that I see is when your organization tries to circumvent your group or whoever owns data governance
Mm,
and go around it. It's because you've set things in policy or practice that is truly not achievable, and it's stalling a lot
yeah.
of the progress. And then, lastly, in my view, not all AI or not all data is created equal, right? So if you are going to operationalize it, it's important to look at your data, your AI use cases and your data from a risk-based perspective. And that's one really good way of ensuring that you get some execution. There'll be AI use cases that we implement that don't require that level of governance, or really, right? There's more internal work, or it's really not going to be much of a risk impact if something goes wrong. So do you apply the same level of scrutiny on something like that? It really helps you see some value really quickly, and you can start to move forward. And then just training people of really understanding of your why governance is important, because a lot of times people think of governance as this idea in the cloud somewhere that they don't really understand why we need to do it, and just training them so they understand why we have to um, apply these policies to begin with to ensure proper usage of AI.
That's a really great point. And to close this one out, Simi.
Yeah, I agree with everything that everyone stated here. The only thing that I would add to the discussion is the separation of compliance and policy governance with respect to data asset governance. So the two are slightly different, rolls up to the same organizational umbrella at the end of the day, but at the same time, the way you approach policy and compliance and security governance with respect to your governance of your data with data quality, catalog, ownership of the data asset, data element, what have you. So there's different ways of doing both, and organizations do need to be aware that the skill set that requires policy and compliance governance, required for policy and compliance governance, is different from what's required for data asset governance, and the tools and technologies related to it is also different in that space. So in these spaces, so that's all I want. The only thing I wanted to add to that.
No, I appreciate that. I think I'd like to start to shift the conversation towards, some practical advice that we can offer to the audience. on how we can get to these places, how we can get to an AI readiness, both from a data and an organizational perspective. So if you're advising, a CDO, perhaps someone that's in the audience today and building an AI readiness roadmap, where should they start, and what should they prioritize first in getting going? So I'm gonna go to Saba first on this one.
Thank you. I think with AI readiness, just with any other type of transformation, I think it's very important for the leader to understand the business's priorities. Because without that, you can't just use AI for the sake of using AI, and not every strategy, not every solution is going to require AI either. So you have to go in with that understanding, but more importantly, understanding of what the business is trying to achieve. Like, what are your strategies to begin with? So, and then can AI then become an enabler to that, and not be an be all end all kind of a scenario. That's important at least in my view, from an AI readiness perspective,
Hmm.
because then it'll help you understand what foundation do you then need to support that strategy. Whether, like, risk-based approach that I talked about, are there certain things in your policy you should put in that's more risk-based, and not judge every AI use case the same way? As is there training in your roadmap, right? And training not just for the teams that are going to be deploying, or from a technology perspective, or even from a governance perspective, but across the firm, across your organization, because it's a new thing. Where data governance used to be more of things we talked about in technology and data spaces, with AI, everybody needs to learn why that's important. So your AI roadmap definitely needs to have training built in, whether it be teams from technology side or across the organization. It's very critical.
Back to Simi.
Yeah, no, I'm just coming off of doing exactly this with other leaders of the organization, right? So it just the experience of it, right? Every organization now has this shift in mind in terms of how do we use it. And so I would start with people first, and making sure that our people in the organization is ready for the changes that we want to implement. Secondly, the number one is making sure that we have that business problem that's highly impacted by this technology, that there is value in it, that it changes the way we do our processes appropriately, and that the people who are doing the work today are comfortable with applying these tools to that problem so that they can do the work much easier, faster, better, with higher accuracy, right? So that's the foundation before you try and launch any technology enterprise-wide. Secondly, then, how do we train our models? What models? All of those require, again, everything that we've talked about before, good data foundation. We need governance. We need to bake in lineage. We need to bake in security, privacy. One of the things that we as an organization really worry about with Gen AI, things like ChatGPT and Copilot integrated work in an environment, if permissions for people give the wrong people access to things that they shouldn't see, how is that going to impact from a security perspective, from a
Yeah.
compliance perspective, right? If
Yeah.
you're an employee, in somewhere who's seeing HR data that they shouldn't be seeing, I mean, that is a huge problem for a company. So making sure that our access controls are appropriately placed is a hugely important problem that we're facing from a security standpoint. So,
Shanti, are you seeing similar things?
Yeah, yes. I think to me, I always talk about being outcome driven. Start with what the outcome is, work backwards. And everybody is in a different level when it comes to data and AI maturity. So there's no one size fits all. If you're more mature in your data practices, then you're kind of building on it for your AI. But if you're not there, you're in early days, then start with targeted use cases, work backwards, So as you're preparing your data for AI, you're also building a lot of the data foundations, whether it's your data cataloging or your governance or your policies or your quality controls. So have a very incremental approach, showing some early wins and showing what good looks like is really important. I think that's one thing that I've seen work really well. So I always talk a lot about outcome driven or working backwards or right to left, whatever you want to
Hmm.
call it, is
Yeah.
just kind of starting there because the boil the ocean and big bang approaches, tend to, have very limited success, a high risk of failure. So I think that's an important criteria. And in the early days, over communicate. Communication is a big part of it. And this is no different from AI, as we've done in the past for data, driving that data literacy and kind of folks understanding what it all means and what is their responsibility. I always believe that the data team, like the CDO groups are good to set up frameworks, the governance structure, the capabilities and the tooling and the processes. But data is everybody's business, right? Knowing clear accountabilities, producers, consumers, what role each one plays in that ecosystem with clearly defined personas and what metrics and KPIs you want to measure, I think is another big culture shift and a change. And being able to measure those KPIs and provide
Yeah.
transparency is another key area. And when it comes to data quality, again, depending on where you are in your journey, if your early days, don't boil the ocean. What does good data quality look like? Well, that depends. It's not one size fits all because AI itself has, it's a broad spectrum, right? There's AI for productivity, for your co-pilots and your chat GPTs
Yeah.
and your day-to-day stuff, it's a productivity increase. But there's also the other end of the spectrum where agentic AI, is really driving autonomous agents, working, ecosystem agents, one agent monitoring another. That's another
Right.
spectrum to it. So I think it's depending on what your use case is, be very targeted there in terms of what your thresholds for data quality and what your needs for governance and cataloging needs are, and go from there. The key theme here is start simple and scale once you build your foundations.
And Charu?
We've covered a lot of aspects, obviously, that are critical to the roadmap here. I think the key, and I'll double down on a couple of those. I think trust is going to be the most important factor. The pace of change in Gen AI every day, every hour, if not every minute, is just unmatched to anything we've ever seen in any industry. Everybody's ecosystem has changed. So the trust for the customers of organizations to be able to trust what the organization is doing with AI, or the employees to trust their organization with what they're doing with AI, or how their jobs are changing. For us as organizations to trust in the systems and technologies, I think that's going to be really important. The obvious ones like data management, data architecture, and the technology stack, I think those are very important to the roadmap. But I think change management and communication, I would say, and we've touched upon it a little bit earlier in the conversation. I think those being equally important in the roadmap and being, over communicated, overemphasis on change management for employees, for customers, for organizations, even to inspire them how to use AI in a product space or any other part of the organization, whether it's technology or anything else. I think those need to be equally important as the tech stack or architecture or data management, which I'm not fully sure if every organization is thinking about them as important as they should be.
That's fascinating. The thing I always like to end with something a little bit more provocative. So I guess in this case, and we'll keep these answers relatively short, and then I'm already seeing some great questions in the Q&A that we can get to after this. But like, what will ultimately separate the organizations that turn AI into real business value from those that stall out? I've heard a few of these things from you already, but sort of interested to hear your final perspective on this for the audience. And we'll start with Shanti.
So one use case we're working on is really, again, going back, what I stated earlier, working backwards or outcome driven. We've taken a use case and we're taking it end to end. to say what data do we need, what quality controls we need, what right sources of data do we need, establishing clear ownership and accountability, kind of step one in that journey. And then step two is really now this use case is primed for automation for agentic AI. So where we're now saying is once we get these foundations in, let's not implementing agentic AI where we can automate it. And that's going to be a game changer for that line of business where today there's lots of manual processes, lots of human intervention in there. We still want human in the loop, but there's lots of repeatable process that we can automate, and that's kind of what we're going after. So I think showing some early wins where you go beyond POC and take it into production and show those wins and learn from it and communicate that broadly, I think that's the first step in the journey for me.
And Charu?
We said this earlier in the conversation. You start with business value and you measure what that business value is, whether it is increasing the revenue, reducing any expenses, or putting the organization in a better regulatory spot. AI, Gen AI needs to solve for a business problem. These are shiny, nice tools to publish, but what is the business problem being solved for? How are we measuring and monitoring that business value as we go? And sharing that and communicating that, I think, is the key to success in picking the right use cases and getting the right return on investment for organizations.
And Simi?
Yeah, tripling down on that business value there. But a lot of organizations look at this and think, you don't want to use technology for the sake of using technology, right? I think everyone has said that here pretty much already. You want to understand where we can use the technology effectively in order to make lives easier for our employees and our customers. Both matter. So understanding processes that drive the business is number one to me, and where can we save time and effort and make things easier for everyone, reduce friction. So that's going to be a core aspect of how to make this successful in organizations. And and have outcomes and metrics and KPIs associated with applying technology in these spaces and track it, monitor it. And then by and large, what I've seen in organizations is that people are embracing Gen AI capabilities. It makes day-to-day so much easier in many ways from a productivity standpoint for everyone in the organization, not just those people who are comfortable with technology, who are data scientists. Secondly, I feel like coming from that data science world, it used to be that it was this core special group of people who could use AI technology, right? That's not the case anymore with the newest release of everything out there. Your average person can now write code and spin up a website and do things that wasn't possible before. And that's driving a ton of adoption, but that does not mean that it's used appropriately, right? So what I've also seen is that a person who has 10x experience in engineering, data engineering in the business, right? A claims expert can ask the right questions to these tools, to the agents, better than somebody who has no claims experience or no medical experience or no data engineering experience. So having experience matters in this space too. And I think that's something that we don't really think about too much. A junior person who has never worked in an organization jumping in and thinking they're an expert in something, that's not the case. You cannot use these language understanding tools to think that you can solve every problem with it, even though you don't know anything about the area that you're working in. So I think, that's one thing to watch out for. And again, the rest of it, the building blocks like clean data, governance, all of that is hugely important, and that is going to drive your overall enterprise deployment of technologies.
And last but certainly not least, Saba.
Everything that, all the panelists said here, the one thing I'll just add on that is the organization that will, stand out and differentiate themselves are the ones that are willing to also invest in the foundational things that we've been talking about, right? A lot of times everybody wants, they may understand they want quality data, but you have to invest in it, right? And understand that it's only after that, and you're not going to see results overnight, but investing and putting your money towards those critical things is important. That's your foundation. And then, taking those pilots, I think earlier someone said that taking a pilot and showing real value. The value of the pilot also is that it tells you where your bottlenecks may be, right? And it allows you to invest in those areas to clear those bottlenecks. So when you do it at scale, you're able to do it faster. So those are a few things that I'd add.
No, I really appreciate all of that, and appreciate the entire conversation. This has been absolutely fantastic. I also want to give a shout out to this chat. I've done a lot of these panel webinars. This has been certainly one of the more enthusiastic chats that I've seen, and that's awesome. And obviously, it's been a really good conversation. There's some good questions. I'm going to jump into these. We'll try to get to all of them. Try to keep our answers pretty tight, but just so we can try to hit as many of these questions as possible. But thank you all for being so engaged in the conversation. So. We have one question here that is, what quality thresholds must be in place before AI models can be trusted to automate workflows rather than amplify inconsistencies? And I guess we could just, if you have an answer and you want to jump in and answer that, go ahead.
I can start. I think the answer is going to be depends. Again, it depends on the criticality of the use case. If something is really critical, then the bar for what that threshold is pretty high. No different from quality controls that you have traditionally, where if it's finance related or something, your bar is pretty high. But when other use cases you're testing and learning, it doesn't have to be as high. You kind of start where just good enough is a good place to start, and then you continue to build on it. So again, there's no one size fits all, but I think it's really based on use case, your thresholds can be really high or can be somewhere in the middle.
Yeah,
Any
I was
other?
just sorry.
Yeah.
I was just going
No,
to add
please
to
go
that,
ahead.
Antonio. Exactly what Shanti said, right? The risk-based approach that I was referring to earlier. What if you approach it from that perspective, you'll really understand what your threshold should be. But it's also important to understand your baseline. What has been your baseline in terms of quality? Because obviously you want to achieve greater than the baseline, and then based on the risk that you see with that use case, your threshold may be higher in terms of quality than in some other use cases.
I'll add one more thing to that, right? When you
Okay.
talk about workflows, right, there is what's written in documentation and then what's actually being done. Making sure the two aligns is going to be another huge area to focus on. Yeah.
I think one thing I will add is anytime you're implementing something new in a workflow, I think a risk-based approach is obviously the first step. You need to make sure if you're doing something for a regulatory purpose that has a very different threshold than something that is internal facing that an employee is doing. But human in the loop, I think as you're building these use cases and doing something new, start small, start with human in the loop, test it out, see how it plays out, and then scale up and then have the right checks and balances in place. So there's no, the right percentage of quality check threshold that you can implement. It depends on the process. And then if you have the right approach and right checks and balances in place, it typically works out.
What data governance practices should be implemented to manage access to data that's behind an MCP server?
I would say privacy and security obviously are key things there to make sure you don't have leakage of PII or sensitive data. Your API keys are exposed, and you're kind of going after trusted. So MCP is great in kind of enabling that integration, but obviously the underlying controls and what sources of data is really a key component of that integration strategy with MCP.
Yeah,
Any other?
fully agree with that. Yeah. Nothing to add to that. Exactly what we worry about every day. So yeah.
And then how do you prevent or correct the booming AI technical debt before it happens, especially when every team is experimenting with the latest AI tools? The more AI tools introduced within the company introduces fragmented data sources exponentially. I feel like that's sort of like a bit of an evolution of a problem that had already existed. So that's a really interesting question.
Yeah, that
I
I can take that and start out. It actually is a reality. It's happening a lot. So it's a very
Hmm.
good question. I would say, the earlier question you had asked, Antonio, on what the roadmap should be. Once within your roadmap, that should be part of the effort you take to understand what debt you have already, and consider that in terms of how you solve it. But then also that roadmap should be communicated across. It's like any change management exercise, right? So people understand what the go forward is, both with the tech debt that they may have already built and the tools that they may have already sourced, right? Are those tools part of your AI roadmap, or would those need to be sunset? Just with any other type of transformation. So I think, if you do your roadmap right, and communicate some more, and so people understand and get trained on it, I think this is one way to solve that problem.
I'll add to that, Antonio. I think having the right central prioritization process as to what the company is focused on, I think that goes a long way. So a lot of organizations are putting in the right processes in place where all the use cases across the company are collected,
Hmm.
prioritized, and there's a plan to implement those in a very consistent fashion. So I think having that process in place, and that sort of, not necessarily governance, but that type of prioritization and oversight in place is very important. Otherwise, everybody's going to do their own thing in the organization.
We have three questions left, but they all kind of center around both governance and like kind of culture. So I'll ask one of them. I know we probably won't answer every last bit of each of those questions, but I think categorically and thematically they're quite similar. So how do you see organizations building a strong data culture to complement that governance? And one where employees at all levels understand, trust, and actively use data in their decision making.
I'll start. I think to me, one of the big culture shift is a mindset of people not seeing governance as something that slows things down, right? It's not just an enforcement function, but it's more an enabler function. So the more you build governance as part of your day-to-day processes, the more sustainable it becomes. So it's kind of taking some real examples and showing, hey, by doing this and doing this more proactively and building into the process, there was no separate governance need that we have to do in the end where you don't pass, project requirements and you're
Yeah.
stalling and you're not able to go to production because we planned for this. It's part of a process. So kind of building that is a culture shift. It's a mind shift. I think that's one of the key components to be addressed because you don't want governance to be a flavor of the month or a flavor of the year. It's just something that needs to be ingrained into the DNA of the organization. This is how we do business. This is how we run our business.
Yeah.
So I think it's a huge culture shift from that perspective. And obviously, to make that happen, establishing clear roles and responsibilities, providing tooling and capabilities to do this in a sustainable manner. Those are the governance functions and enablers that I think about, and not just a policy. Policies are great, but you need to have the capabilities, the ability to implement aspects of those policies and be able to enforce it and measure it.
Perfect. Any last thoughts on that question before we close it out?
fully agree with that. One thing I would add is that it's a training thing, and HR has a huge part in this in making sure that everybody understands the role of the governance within the company and how hugely important it is for the sustainability of the business. At the end of the day, if the business goes away, everybody's jobs are impacted. So making sure if there is no breaches, there is no core financial and business data gets into the wrong hands, that's the responsibility of every employee in the company. So from that perspective, governance is incredibly important in this space.
Awesome. Um, thank you all so much for this conversation. It's like both I think I saw in the chat it was inspiring. I would certainly concur. It's certainly insightful. Everything that we learned today. I'm very thankful for you all for being here and sharing your thoughts with us today. I think one of the things that was really clear across the entire conversation is that like the success of these programs and the organizations depends on a lot of that foundational data integrity. Organizations that are investing in sort of that clean and connected and contextualized data, and they're pairing that with, the strong governance programs and an empowered sort of data-rich culture will be the ones that are able to scale AI with confidence and clarity. So I did mention a few different pieces of research at the top. If folks in the audience are interested in learning a little bit more about that, you can visit the Precisely website to download the 2025 Data Integrity Trends and Insights report. And then we also have in early 2026, we'll be offering the 2026 report that we also did with Drexel University. So excited to share all of that with you. And thank you for joining us and being such a great audience. It's been fantastic today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.